I wanted to kind of start, often we've done walls in the past, but I've never actually started in the gardens here, which seems to me somewhat remiss of me not to have kind of thought to do that, insofar as that we can't really tell the story of the walls without starting here. Yeah, we are very fortunate. We're an all-weather kind of county, Elizabeth. It's never bad weather here, just the wrong clothes, as they say. So, without further ado, let us kind of spin on. So we're in just the edge of the museum gardens here, the Multangular Tower. And it's a good place to start, really, because when we're talking about the walls, obviously, what we're looking at really is a kind of composite, you know, of Roman elements, stuff then built on by the Vikings, shaped by the Normans, then really kind of given wings in the medieval period, and then kind of taken apart and rebuilt in the Victorian era. So there isn't kind of one narrative, but if there is a single starting point of the narrative, I guess it kind of starts here. In the kind of corner point of the tower. This was called the Multangular Tower. It was originally built, we believe, in the 3rd century under the reign of Septimus Severus, who has the honour of being one of the 2 Roman emperors that actually died here in York. So he came on a visit, see how things were going against the Scots in the kind of northern part of the empire, and he came to oversee the kind of new buildings. So originally it should have been a kind of more of a regular sort of tower in this corner, but this was kind of state-of-the-art 3rd century. And it's called multi-angular, it's got 14 sides, although 4 sides were sort of cut away to give you access, if you like, to the front. We're going to go around the front to give you a sort of better sort of perspective on what that kind of looks like. But of course, you know, the Romans having come here, originally weren't really planning to stay. I've kind of told this kind of story before. They came to intercede within a sort of Roman wall down here as well, with medieval upper parts. They came to intercede in a civil war in the north, brought about by forces, or rather by Queen Cartamundra, who was loyal to the Romans against a bunch of rebels, if you want to put it in kind of Star Wars terms. You know, the Rebel Alliance that were keen to kind of a bit kind of what the Romans ever done for us type, terribly ungrateful, didn't like kind of stone towers, anything like that, and wanted to kind of boot them out. And so consequently, the Romans sort of came and established themselves here as a fort, came from Lincoln, and they built this edifice. Now, I've got a nice little picture here. This was painted in 1811, so before they were kind of really, I suppose, kind of renovated to a kind of major degree. And it shows this corner tower, which you're about to see, but also the wall that I've kind of just shown you kind of running away. So that in 1811, you know, we still had, you know, a substantial section of these kind of Roman and medieval remains. What's interesting about York is because of its economics, because of the Civil War, because of the War of the Roses kind of getting on the wrong side, York really didn't do very well economically for about 350 years. So thank you, Natalie. So consequently, the Industrial Revolution kind of passed York by. What that did mean, of course, was that, you know, as people became suddenly more interested in the medieval period, they had this kind of playground waiting for them. So from the sort of Georgian period onwards, it became very, very fashionable to be interested and take an interest in what would be called the medieval period, that middle period, what previously had been kind of associated with really kind of be backwardsness and plague and superstition and faith above reason and science. But what they saw in it, they began to see this through a wholly kind of romantic lens. So people are being increasingly interested in the stories of Robin Hood, King Arthur and Guinevere, Sir Lancelot, that weird little ménage à trois. They came looking at, and so of course they began to dig and excavate. And what they sort of established really was that the tower here was, as I say, was originally built by Septimus Severus, but then this structure that sticks out is actually 4th century, very, very likely early part of Constantine's reign, so Constantine the Great. And this, as I say, was kind of state of the art. And of course, by making it multi-angular, what it allowed you to do was that within this castle, you know, this kind of corner tower, you have your ordnance, your catapults and weapons of mass destruction. You could angle your ordnance in any direction you wanted to. So they really were kind of very, very dangerous. But the Romans did love a fortress. So initially when they came, that fortress would have been sort of wooden palisades, so earthworks and wood. Once it was kind of clear that they weren't kind of going anywhere and that York was actually a useful part of the Roman Empire, they then sought to kind of build in stone. So our initial sort of story, our legacy, if you like, of the walls is that by probably the first part of the 2nd century, increasing parts of the Roman walls, were constructed as you can see them today. And that where you can't see the Roman walls, they're still there, it's just they're covered over by earthworks. And so as we're coming along here down the side of the King's Manor here, you can kind of see these earthworks. And so when the Vikings came, when the Danes came and took over the city in 867, they kind of took the Roman embankments and covered them with soil to kind of take them up a level, and then built their own kind of wooden fortress on top. So even though we can only see sort of fragments of the Roman walls as we kind of go around, you kind of got a constant line. And what's interesting about the Roman walls is, in effect, they sort of shape and define the city to this day. So consequently, if I bring up a second picture for you to have a look at, now this is from 1611. So I've deleted that now. Well done. Essentially, this, if you look at the kind of top part of it there, where you kind of got like almost like a W shape at the top, if you like, that's the section of walls we're going to walk on first, and it's completely unchanged, and that's because it's following the line of the Roman wall. So basically, whilst I'll talk about how things have changed and kind of evolved over time, as you can see that map now, as Janie will kind of tell you, that's pretty much, you could stick that right onto a modern map of York. So the main entrances, the gateways, the river crossing, the location of the Minster, which is obviously where the kind of Roman fortress was kind of located. The Romans still define, if you like, how we physically interact with York. So when we're walking through York, through certain sections, not all of it, but the section we're going to walk through now, we're very much kind of following Roman footsteps, which I think is lovely. They've been gone for, 1600 years or thereabouts, but we still encounter York. We still follow the path that they created for us. We see the vistas that they envisaged. We can look and understand why gates are in the kind of places they were, because obviously defensive requirements that they were, designed. So for instance, when we go to, why isn't that going up? Go away. Go away, good. Get a sip of water. So coming to Booth and Bar, as we are now, we're going to go up onto the walls. If I can get across this road, which could take 5 minutes because we've got lots of material. Got the cuddly bareback for summer. So it's been a bit white on white for me so far, so apologies if I've missed any of your questions or text. Do let me know if anything kind of comes up. But so kind of Booth and Bar is the sort of first of the main gateways, really, that most people will encounter when they're here in York. And it is a 19th century reconstruction of a building that is largely 13th and 14th century in construction. And it was designed, of course, to defend the northern side of the city from attack. And as we kind of go up to the top, we'll get a kind of nice vista down the North Road, which now runs onto the A90, the original North Road, joins the A1, a little bit kind of about 25 miles or so north of York. But this was an area, obviously, if you think about this really as being, the end of the empire, that's kind of a good way to think about York. Because whilst, of course, Hadrian's Wall, and for a while the Antonine Wall, became the sort of northern extent of the Roman Empire, this was the last settlement. This was the kind of last decent glass of red wine you were going to get in Britain. So this is right at the end of the world as far as the Romans go. So there be dragons. You've got maybe a 4-day march up to Hadrian's Wall in this direction. So it's what we now call Scotland, so straight down the road there. But as I say, this was the last civilization as far as they were concerned. It was a very, very tough posting being up at Hadrian's Wall. The Romans did not like it. It was something to endure rather than enjoy. It was very attritional. The battles with the Pictish warriors up there, as the Romans called them, the Scottish warriors, was rarely in any kind of battle formation. It was dealing with guerrilla warfare, So consequently, it wasn't, you know, pitched battles or honour or glory or anything to be won. It was protecting yourself against being attacked, centuries being killed overnight, and these sorts of things. You know, so it just becomes very, very dispiriting, I guess, for the soldiers there. So there we go. So there's our kind of modern map of the walls. You see that? So that's that shape I was talking about, the top corner, where you go from here down to here, which is what we're going to do today, is all in a Roman line. You can see nice straight lines there, interval towers. Now, so a number of the towers have gone. They're along the way. We can show you where some of them were along the way. But hello, Susan. Hello, Polly. Lovely to see you on here. So as I say, looking down towards the Great North Road, and this edifice, as I say, what a better description, was very much about security for attacks from the north. And really, this, as I say, was like the end of the world, which I think is kind of an interesting concept, isn't it, when you think about it from Roman terms. Signal may drop for a second in here. Don't worry, we will come back out. Yes, exactly, Monty Python. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the vibe that people had up on Hadrian's Wall. They were scared. You know, and it's kind of worth mentioning as well, there's a portcullis, by the way, of course, we'll talk about Muirridge when we get to Monk Barrow, I think. I'll come through here because invariably the signal drops there, so we'll take it. So yeah, I mean, I love that Monty Python, for those who haven't seen Holy Grail, that Cheryl's talking about, you know, that just sort of piling on abuse. That was the kind of the problem, you know, that they were sort of dealing with, you know, community that ostensibly was going about their daily business, you know, kind of farming and trading and so forth. But that, you know, a knife could be suddenly, you know, come from out of a cloak, you know, somebody gets kind of stabbed in the side, everybody disappears, nobody kind of knows what happened. You know, it's that invisible enemy, isn't it? You know, so it's like Afghanistan, it's like Northern Ireland, all these kind of places where, you know, you've had mighty states patrolling Vietnam, you know, in very, very hostile environments, and invariably kind of coming off worse because the troop morale sort of plunges so low at these times. That, you know, what appears to be on the face of it a very one-sided struggle, in actual fact becomes defeat in everything but name, because the heart, the energy is just sort of sapped out of the soldiers. But that's not what York was about. York was built as a fortress kind of behind the lines, and its location here was kind of key because obviously at the confluence of the River Foss and the River Ouse, it's a good place for defences. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, kind of why it was put what it was. But the main reason, if you look at a map of the UK, those who can live here will know, those that are from overseas, do just look at the shape of it and you'll see there's kind of two major inlets, two major estuaries, one of which is the Thames estuary, Essex and Kent on one side, go through the River Thames, the Port of London, and the other, of course, is the Humber estuary at Hull, about 40 miles from where we are right now, that enabled big ships to get in. So consequently, from a perspective of supplying Hadrian's Wall, thank you, and the Roman army, York was perfect. So, you know, whilst they originally came here with the sort of perspective that we're not stopping, we're just coming here to kind of sort out the civil war, it made a lot of sense for them actually to establish themselves here. So consequently, you know, the stone walls, now all this has been rebuilt in the medieval and then subsequently in the Victorian era, of course. But it made a lot of sense strategically. York was a sound place, and I mean that's, you know, still to this day, you know, York and London are considered, you know, the two cities of England. Now Birmingham, of course, overtook it in the Industrial Revolution. Manchester's overtaken it more recently in terms of its economic situation. So York is far from, you know, a capital city, but nonetheless it kind of continues to have the kind of prestige. So, just, of course, the monarch's second son has been the Duke of York for hundreds and hundreds of years. Not too keen on the current one, has to be said. Or is he still Duke of York? I'm not sure. Anyway, Andrew Windsor, as he's known these days, somewhat disgraced. But it gives you that kind of sense. The fact we've got an Archbishop of York, one of Canterbury, you know, it just kind of shows York's sort of status. And that, I think that status is very much going to be in evidence here in the stonework. You know, so starting with the Romans. So bear in mind, what you're looking at here is a kind of Victorian rebuilding of the medieval. But nonetheless, because it's following precisely the line of the Romans, it gives you a sense of the size of the fortress here. the basilica, which is kind of in the centre of it, the kind of command centre, which is now basically where the minster is located. So we've got this kind of sense of swamp gas, absolutely, yeah. Built it on a swamp, it sank, came out, built it again. Jabberwock, have you seen that? It's a really good film. From the kind of Monty Python, Terry Gilliam. I think Terry Jones, Terry Gilliam, that one? Anyway, I digress more than a trifle here. So I think if you're looking for sort of status, when we think about the walls, imagine arriving here, as a medieval merchant, or maybe the son or daughter of a medieval merchant, that you're living in a farming hamlet. Okay, the Lord of the Manor is maybe you've got a two-storey house, but everybody else is living in single stories. And you kind of come here and you arrive at the city gates, you pay your muirage, your tax on the way in, because that's the other good thing about city walls is they control not only who comes in and who goes out, but also it's a taxation point, thank you. It's a really good way of clobbering them, making sure they can't get away with not paying their taxes. Haven't sold you a goods yet? Don't worry, you're going to pay your tax in advance because that's convenient for us. You're not getting into these markets where you can access wealthy customers that are going to buy your stuff. So, the walls have a strategic component. They have a aesthetic component, insofar as obviously it's kind of, look at us, look at how impressive we are. They have an economic component because it controls access and entry. Of course, there's a defensive military component, and when we go around the corner, we'll have a look at the ditches and so forth and think about that. But it all adds up to this was a place that mattered. And I think that if there's kind of one thing to kind of take away from the walls, that when anybody comes to York, they can see that with the minster and with the walls, even if you saw nothing else, you get the sense that, for centuries, this is a place where people have felt that this is an important city, it's an important location, and it deserves that prestige is shown in stone. And stone, of course, was always a very expensive building material. It's rather inconvenient building material. It's very heavy to carry it a long way. But nonetheless, until the era of kind of gunpowder came along, in the era of the bows and arrows and the projectiles, there's nothing really better. And if we look down here, obviously at this sort of defensive slot, it's very, very difficult for anybody to fire back at you, but you've actually got a pretty good range from here, in terms of from side to side. With arrow slots all along the walls, when they're kind of patrolled at times of war, when the walls need defending, it was very, very kind of well equipped. So you're not going to take York on, without really thinking about it. And of course, in the eras of walled cities, of citadels and castles, the primary form of warfare wasn't actually direct attack, it was siege. So the idea, of course, was to trap you, to prevent the inflow and outflow of goods, of fresh water, poison the wells, chuck plague victims in. That was the kind of order of the day, simply because how could you really take on city walls like this? That they were simply too impenetrable. But starving the people inside, well, that's a different matter. And also you might start doing things like you might start digging under the foundations. You might try, in the early years, placing explosive. Famous guy, of course, in York, Guy Fawkes, was precisely that. He'd fought in the War of Spanish Succession? Anyway, been 7 years overseas in Spain, called Guido. Very pretentious. His name was Guy. But he learned this technique of basically, in siege warfare, burying under the walls, placing explosive charges, and exploding them at strategic points, which of course would lead the walls to tumble. And the great problem with once walls start tumbling is not only does it let the enemy in, but it's very likely to crush your own people as well. So, it's a very much a double-edged sword. So once gunpowder and explosives came along, the era of the walled city, the citadel, the castle, was very much kind of coming to an end. Manage taxes well enough, they usually find a way. Taxation is rarely a problem. They invariably find a way, but a lot gate is a good way of doing it. So this is known as Robin Hood Tower, and its construction is Victorian because this section here went through a major, St John University, just on that side, went through a kind of major reconstruction in the Victorian era. But there is a Robin Hood Tower mentioned in the records. As so often, these kind of scraps of records, and the record that we have relates to repairs at Robin Hood Tower in 1600. So it was certainly there at that stage. No one knows quite how it got the name. We've talked about Robin Hood before. Robin Hood may well have been an individual. He may well be a composite of people, or it may be that it literally describes a robber in a hood. In other words, kind of a guy that's seeking to mask his identity. So Robin Hood could have been one person, a few people, or loads of people. We'll never know. But keeping vagabonds and outlaws out, as well, of course, invading warriors, is you've got these splendid moats. So as you can see, the embankment kind of runs down to our left-hand side, and at the bottom there, where you see the path, would have been the moat. Now, this also worked as a sewerage system for the city. So all the nasties, before, of course, we had fresh water, flushing toilets, and all those niceties we've come to depend upon. This is where it all went. So, of course, it meant you had to be extra double determined, really, to really want to kind of get through the swamp, to climb the embankments, and, of course, we should be picked off. So as we kind of run along here, you see how straight the wall is. You know, this is not easy to attack in discreetly, as you might say. You're going to be spotted. However, any system is only as good as the sentinels, the guards that are there to watch. And so being a watchman was an incredibly important job. You were the people that stayed awake while the city slept. And of course, woe betide you if you were to fall asleep on your watch. It was, the punishments for it were legendary and brutal. And it involved this here shitty swamp, for want of a better description. Anybody that was caught falling asleep on duty, the record's saying, would be stuck over here on a kind of long pole and a basket. And they're suspended over the swamp, and it was up to them. When they were given a knife, and when they felt like it, when they were starting to starve, they had a knife, they could cut the rope, and of course they'd tumble headfirst then into the swamp. And if they didn't drown, or die of hypothermia, because obviously it wasn't a heated swamp, and they could get out, and then they didn't die of septicemia from basically swimming in raw sewage, then if they made it out, they were then banished for a year and a day. And being banished means being kind of removed from the law. That's where the term outlaw comes from. You're literally outside the law, which means you have no recourse if anybody messes with you. Anyone takes your stuff, tough. Yeah, this is the life that you've chosen. So being an outlaw was a kind of a death sentence, really. It's expected to be, because you were outside the laws, outside the cities. You couldn't get any form of charity. You couldn't be supported by anybody helping you to access any support. You know, would become an outlaw themselves. So it's a pretty brutal punishment, really, for falling asleep on the watch. But I think that gives a sense, really, of quite how much fear was endemic in this idea of a citadel can be breached if the people that are there to guard it aren't really being sufficiently vigilant. So currently, First World War, of course, you know, the trenches, soldiers were shot for falling asleep. You know, so it's not that it's exclusive to York, but I think it just kind of shows that kind of fear, that sort of paranoia that, you know, even with a city like this and this kind of defensive structure, that there's always the fear that people will find the loophole, the vulnerable part, and so they had to make the punishment pretty darn awful to deter people. So it's quite pretty darn awful. Some people believe that this here is pretty darn awful. It is almost, well, not even almost, it is definitely Victorian. It is a kind of fancy little folly, really. It's got nothing to do with medieval. It's just kind of the playfulness of the Victorian architects that were kind of rebuilding the walls and thought, do you know what? Let's zhuzh it up a little bit, all right? Let's give it a little bit of wow factor. Let's give it a bit of Disney. Before Disney, of course, but let's give it a bit of Disney. Like Prince Ludwig, the guy in Bavaria, but you know, his architects in to do it, but nothing whatsoever medieval about it. But I kind of think it's cute. But a lot of serious historians, you mentioned serious, as in not me, are kind of a bit offended by it, really, and feel it shouldn't have been part of it or pulled down. But it's too late now, and it's part of Victorian history, really. But it just shows the kind of Victorian attitudes towards, you know, the walls, which was basically, they saw it as a playground. So as I say, you kind of got this historical perspective where people's view towards what they call the medieval period, the middle period between antiquity and enlightenment, was a period of people being terribly backward, totally driven by faith, very superstitious. It was kind of plague-ridden. So it was seen as having no real value. But once the romantics start coming along and people start reading the stories of kind of King Arthur and Robin Hood and the kind of the medieval literature, suddenly it's portrayed in another way. Chivalry becomes, people are fascinated with this kind of medieval code that kind of the knights and those all kind of wooing, giving hankies and kind of unrequited love and also unreturned love and all that sort of thing, and going off and killing dragons, to kind of prove that you're worthy. It's kind of very much, in that kind of way. And so they'd literally come along and dress up and play a lot of wimple play. The cosplay of its day involved wimples, and many of them. So wimples, like a sort of conical hat the ladies would wear. So they thought York was just this wonderful playground, that they could sort of come and dress up and get kind of do the kind of cosplay and have a good old time, and no doubt get up to some canoodling in the bushes afterwards, as people are wont to do when cosplay takes them in that direction. Who have we got on? So Cynthia's on. Hello, Cynthia. It is so nice to see you. Actually, anybody else? Does anybody want a wimple? Do let me know if there's any wimple fans out there. Of course, we have this wonderful view. Everyone's kind of stopping for. Look across the Minster. But as I say, originally, of course, this was the site of the Roman Basilica, right in the heart of the Roman fortress right now. So basically, once obviously the basilica was sort of taken down, this was a prime spot. So it was the obvious spot for the Minster. Now, talking about a prime spot, by the Georgian era, when these houses were kind of being built, kind of Dean Court here has been permanently occupied since the Norman conquest, but obviously substantially rebuilt. You're looking at Victorian build here, but some Georgian builds just in the background there. Put that in kind of century picture. They started to kind of see the walls as being very fashionable. So as I say, if you were kind of inclined to admire the medieval, the romantic, having a bit of medieval wall in your garden was kind of de rigueur. That's what kind of people wanted. So they could sort of see it as their bit of wall. So as you can see these houses along here, each of them would have had at the end of their garden a bit of wall. So consequently, when the mayor and kind of corporation of York decided that it would be a good wheeze to open this all up to the public as a walkway, people were pretty horrified. And some of these kind of these Victorian sort of owners, were dead against it, absolutely dead against it. And it took a considerable period of time, particularly for this house here, as I say, which now presents this finest view, which is ironic because the owner of it at the time, Edwin Gray, was absolutely dead set against this promenade being created that we're kind of walking down. But he was somehow persuaded, and whatever it took, we don't know. It's certainly not kind of written down. But one family bought Clifford's Tower, just a kind of play thing, Let's buy Clifford's Tower to play in. And they grew kind of trees and bushes around it, use it as a pretty picnic place at the bottom of their garden. So this is that kind of sense. But the Lord Mayor and the corporation were kind of in two minds about this, because either they made use of it, or they had to kind of renovate it and repair it because it was becoming a liability. They'd knocked sort of bits down. We'll talk about that in a minute, actually. But they really wanted to build this walkway here. So by the 1880s, they decided to create this walkway. And you see here's a little plaque saying this tablet was placed here by the Council of York October 1898 to record that this portion of the wall in the year 1889 was restored by the city by Adam Gray, who served as the office of Lord Mayor in 1898. Now, if you associate those two things, Edwin Gray dead against allowing a walkway here, Edwin Gray becomes Lord Mayor, as it being any way related. That's on you, that's your cynicism. The historical record is he changed his mind and he allowed this promenade to be created. And so, from that point onwards, these beautiful gardens then became something of a goldfish bowl, and people have been wandering down there ever since, sticking their beaks into places where they've got no business to be sticking their beaks. Thank you, Polly. But nonetheless, they created it, and we're grateful they did so. So it's a kind of very Victorian idea, of course, the perambulation, the walk, all that kind of health, and this, that, and the other. So from the Victorian era, you're starting to see the walls then as being a leisure component in the city. It's no longer obviously about the city's defences. Of course, it still defines it. But actually, by the Victorian era, or certainly the early part of the Victorian, the late Georgian era, they saw the walls as a nuisance. As the economy was starting to boom, such enterprising industry as they was really being constrained by the walls. It wasn't a case of attracting people in because the walls were there. If you're trying to get raw materials in, finished goods out, these narrow gateways, these narrow lanes become a constraint upon trade. And in the early 1800s, almost every city, major city in Britain took them down. If you go to London, for instance, there's a bit of the walls round by Barbican, the Old Bailey, of course, in the location of the old Ludgate Hill around that way. That's where the walls were. But they took them down simply because they got in the way, and the needs of commerce and the wealthy industrialists, they kind of got their way. But in York, it played out, thank you very much, Janie. In York, it played out rather different. They had lobbied, the corporation in the 1830s had lobbied the Crown to say, these walls are getting in the way, can we take them down? They're a bit of a bloody nuisance, really, nobody wants them, they're falling down. And York would have gone the way of London and Newcastle and many other cities had it not been for the actions of two guys. One of whom was William Etty, whose statue is outside the Art Gallery in York. The other is Sir Walter Scott, thank you, Fran, who has his in Edinburgh. So if you go to Edinburgh, in Printer Street, in the Gardens there, you can see the Walter Scott Memorial, famously Ivanhoe novel. So again, Ivanhoe, was a medieval set novel written in the kind of early Victorian period or late Georgian period. William IV, I think, around then, I think, when it was written. But this fascination, with kind of knights in armour and chivalry and all this, Ivanhoe's very much of that ilk. So when they heard that these, walls were going to be taken down, they were like, whoa, stop that, pause, let's think, reflect. And so they started a campaign, Walter Scott and William Etty, to kind of raise awareness of how kind of special the walls were. Because people lived here, like, whatever, crumbling, old kind of medieval stuff. And an appreciation. And it said they did the first ever sponsored walk. Thank you, Cynthia. From York down to London, to make the case and to kind of raise awareness of the special case for York. And so consequently, they got their way, and the corporation was told, not only can you not take them down, you've got to repair them. Unfortunately, the demolition work had already started. So we're going to come down now, and I'm going to show you what that is. So just about now, I just have a sip. Absolutely, the four things. Yeah, and this is always the case, Polly, isn't it? Is that it takes a rebel to challenge the prevailing opinion. Now, I've got a little bit of scaffolding, but not too much here. So, looking on this side of Monk Bar, which is my favourite four-storey bar, largely rebuilt at the expense of King Richard III, who granted a lot of cash to the city. And there's two things I want you to notice here. Either side of the scaffolding, you see what appear to be doors, which, if you walked out them right now, you'd simply plunge to your death, which wouldn't be great. But they're not ornamental doors, they are real doors, and that's because there was once a barbican there. And I've got a picture here, this is actually a picture from Micklegate Bar. This isn't this bar, but it's the same principle. And you'll see that there originally was an outer gateway that would have come back about 20 feet or so. And the only one in York we've got is Wongate Bar. If we get there today, I'm not sure on time, might not get to Wongate, but the outer gateway was another form of defence. And of course, you can imagine those doors up there running straight onto the top section of the Barbican. It enabled men to kind of patrol. So of course, what then, if you're going to attack the city gates, you'd first have to penetrate the Barbican, but then you're trapped within a very small, tight area, and of course you're very vulnerable to having missiles hurled at you, boiling water, hot oil, hot gravel, you name it, rocks dropped on your head. So consequently, there was another layer of defence. But because they narrowed even further the gateways, when it came to the argument to pull them down, they just they'd already destroyed 3 of these and 5 towers and about 300 yards of the wall. But the Archbishop of York said, first of all, it was the Archbishop of York that stuck up for the walls, not necessarily because he was a great lover of the walls, but rather it was under his jurisdiction. So consequently, it was really a turf war, as you might say. And so I'll show you where we are now. So we started in the gardens, didn't we, over here with the Multangular Tower, which is just about there. We've done this section of Robin Hood Tower. We're now at Monk Bar, and we're going to go down to Jubilee, which of course is where the wall stops. So we'll see how we get on for time. But, we may finish there. We may walk on to Walmgate Bar. Let us see how the mood takes us. Are we all well? Yeah, hot gravel. Yeah, anything will do really. Anything hot is pretty. Your gravel's great, isn't it? Because you imagine, particularly if you're a knight, and you think what like the knights, the sort of they're like a collar around the neck, don't they? As you might say. So it's like a funnel. So you imagine that hot gravel getting to all your nooks and crannies inside a suit of armour. You can see how that would definitely grab your attention. You see me? Oh, it's open. Thank you, Diane. From this side, as it's open, it's not trespassing if it's open, is it? But we're not going any further. It just gives you a sense. And of course, these have been used for various things. The Richard III Museum was there. There's another shop, I believe, is being opened. If it's already open, I'm not entirely sure. There've been police houses. So at various times, and they always had this kind of same purpose insofar as they controlled. So at night watch, they come and lock up, and it controls access and egress to the city. So it's still being used as a security measure right to the early part of the kind of 20th century. What's nice about this section that I don't come down so often with you, haven't done so far, is we get a nice view of the Roman remains. So of course, with this being, again built on, so we're still following the lines of the Romans here. Excuse me, just a sip of water. A bit dry. More of us are cold, Elizabeth. So what, cold gravel would be your thing, would it? Yeah. Would pour ice. Well, funny if there's an ice house down here. So yeah, being filled with cold ice cubes. You didn't do the ice cube challenge then, I'm guessing, Elizabeth. Very fashionable a few years. Did anybody do the ice cube challenge? I certainly didn't. Well, you got an ice bucket over your head. Was that a COVID thing? I can't remember when that happened, but for a while, wasn't there? There was a thing, wasn't people getting buckets of ice water tipped over them? Bloody awful. I didn't volunteer my services. Other things are quite happy to do for charity, but not an ice bucket over the head. All right, plodding fiendishly as we speak, indeed. So, by the way, this does have supposedly a working portcullis, but working is a kind of a very broad term. So the portcullis, the kind of gateway that kind of comes down that could control access during the daytime. Very handy for handing papers over because it's a grid work. Last came down in 1971, I believe, when Queen Elizabeth II obviously came here. But it took about a week to get it back up. Getting it down was dead easy. Getting it back up, less so. It's never gone down again since. But they are now being taken under the stewardship of the Archaeological Trust. So, of course, they may well choose to invest in getting that working. It would be great if they did, wouldn't it? It's supposed to have a portcullis that went up and down, but as yet, no word on that. So, yeah, so we've got a little bit down here from the Roman fortress. So, obviously, being as how this was the fortress, you can see that the earthworks at the ground level of Roman buildings, guardhouses, storage rooms, and so forth. So we're going to see another one just in a second. So it's actually a really good section of the walls here. I should kind of have brought you down here more often, but that's on me. It's not on you. Don't put this on you. It's all me. So yeah, so we're looking at Roman kind of remains down there. And another section just up here, but it's a bit busy up here, so I'm just going to give these guys a minute just to walk on. I do hope you're enjoying today's little vault around the walls. So, is anybody saying they had? They did take part in the ice age. It looked horrendous to me, but I guess it was all for a good cause. If catching hypothermia is ever a good cause, I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, ice bucket, was it really 2014? Good Lord. Good Lord. There's me thinking COVID. COVID has messed with my head, not anybody else. But everything now sort of, I can't work out whether it's before COVID, during COVID, after COVID. It just sort of seems like it sort of, somebody took a rubber in my brain and my kind of time and depth perception is all out of whack as a result. So I blame COVID. Didn't have COVID. I did have it once actually. My wife got it badly twice, but I only got it once. But anyway, what it has done is it's messed with my time-space dimension. So anything round then, I'm going to have no idea. So here's another part of the Roman building. See, so a section of Roman wall over here, and you can sort of see, how the alignment of that structure shows actually how the medieval walls kind of changed slightly. There's a church here as well. St Helens against the wall, so a big medieval graveyard just next to the Merchant Taylors' Hall there. All this was kind of dug out, and there was a medieval church here. Not that there were short medieval churches, but we lost one. Yeah, it did mess with your brain, didn't it? There's something about COVID, I don't know what it is. It just sort of messed with. You said, if somebody says something in 2019, 2020, I'm like, oh, just don't bother telling me. I can't get my head around it. But anyway, it is in the past. So here we go. So we've got section Roman walls. Here's a nice little image of the Roman fortress. So again, everything's a pristine. There's a basilica there in the centre. That's obviously where the minster is now. So we've got Monk Bar. We've just kind of come in through. We're obviously on the eastern corner tower section here. But they did like symmetry, didn't they? They did kind of very so Multanga Tower down that way. So you get a sense of like why that's important right on the kind of corner there. So this, as I say, is the Ouse Bridge area down here. This is still really the top section of York is still kind of defined. Thank you. By this Roman kind of grid pattern. So it could be New York, that couldn't it? Really. Obviously everything we think of the city centre now as being very higgledy-piggledy and kind of organic and so forth. But it didn't start off that way. But what we've still got is this obviously perimeter edge that's shaped. So they've done that to make it look easier for us. But actually it's on an angle like that. So it actually looks like that. We've got a kind of top section that's kind of looks like a baseball pitch, doesn't it? But yeah, so there you go. So yeah, Roman architecture. Isn't that cool? Yeah, isn't that cool? So let's walk on to Merchant Taylor's Hall. Talked many times about gilts, but this one is it looks quite nice from this side, or it looks quite traditional from this side because you've got obviously the exposed wood and the plaster. But on the other three sides, it's kind of covered with brick. So when you see it from this side, it's clear it's a medieval building. When you go on all the other three sides, it's kind of less clear. But it's just nice to get these vistas. I love the kind of rooftops of York, the chimney pots. It's a kind of real nice display. And of course, if you kind of just, as ever, just stop. It's not maybe the nicest part of York here, but some lovely Georgian houses just over that side. The old hospital, what you see there, just in that, see that red brick building there? That was the York County Hospital that was open, I believe, until 1977. I was very accident prone as a kid. I was always sort of cutting myself and breaking things and stitching up. And I remember clearly going there, all kind of like, obviously Georgian building, but that kind of those high Victorian sort of corridors, and kind of everything's sort of strongly disinfectant. And then we got our nice modern hospital. But that was where I would go to get patched up on a periodic basis as a kid. So I remember it well. Posh flats now, of course, as is so much of York. But once upon a time, the City Hospital. And we didn't actually have a hospital for about 400, is it 400 years? 300 years. Because obviously the hospital was originally run by the monks, so the St Helens Hospital, which you've seen, very near to where we started today. When Henry VIII closed down the monasteries, he closed down the hospitals because they were kind of run by monks. So around the city, there were some dispensaries, and this was one of them. Another one was at the, the Merchant Adventures Hall of Piccadilly. So places where you could actually go and collect and buy medicine because there were no hospitals here. So yeah, we were a hospital-free zone for about 300 years, so obviously everybody was clearly very well, had no need for it. But the County Hospital opened, I believe, about 1776, around about the time actually of the American independence. I believe the County Hospital opened. Maybe I might off on that, but not too far. So we're now walking along, and this is the Lord Mayor's Walk, Dewberry rather, coming on this side. But I do like this because you get this really nice kind of kick out. Not part of the original design from the Romans. Now this is where it kind of deviates from the structure. But I think should we, if we put our foot down, we can finish at one will get bar, which would be nice because that has got its barbican. So let's go and see a barbican. We've using 3 bars. So yeah, Dewberry is down here. This is where, remember the thing I do with Dr. Louise Hampson. That's where the Jewish graveyard is down there, of course, outside the city walls because they were literally metaphorically outsiders. So it wouldn't be buried inside the city walls, so they had their own place of burial just outside the walls. And burials actually inside the city, of course, was a perennial challenge. Of course, you had the city churchyards, but at times of disease, particularly plague and contagion, whether it be cholera, whether it be bubonic plague, the last thing you want is to be dealing with your bodies inside the city. So in quite a few spots along the walls, burial pits have kind of been discovered over time, most famously opposite the station. Not discovered, it's still there visibly, but the cholera burial pit from the great cholera epidemic of 1832. We've got bubonic plague pits. We've got you know, kind of variety of these where, you know, it was safer. But of course, the problem was that without clean water, many of the watercourses ran straight through these these kind of pits and was straight back into the water people drank. So it didn't actually turn out to achieve anything like they really kind of wanted to. Actually, should we have a look at St Anthony's Garden? I've not been there for a while. Is it okay if we go on a little bit? Or do we all need to be away by 6 o'clock? If I have 5 minutes on, is that okay? Do let me know. Because it's a good example, really, of a house with a bit of garden in its wall. I like it. So if we're okay with that, I'm not hearing anybody saying, no, finish now, go away and forever hold your peace. You've outstayed your welcome. Or rather, you've only got 15 minutes. I might be able to do it, actually. Let's try. Let's try. We'll get a lick on down Foss Islands. And we'll try and make it to Warngate Bar. But I just want to have a quick look at St Anthony's Hall Garden, because it's so pretty. Let's do it, exactly, Fran. That's this. It's that can-do, will-do spirit. So this is where we're about to leave the walls, and there's a very kind of simple reason for why the walls stop here, and that's because throughout the medieval period, from William I, from William the Conqueror, indeed, this area around here, which was very low-lying, was completely flooded. It was called the King's Fish Pool. Of course, what that meant was that only the king had the right to produce to it, but quite frankly, the king was welcome to it because it was a stagnant sewerage, and the foss has never quite recovered, really. From it doesn't really flow terribly well, and so, as our friend Janie will no doubt tell you if she's walked around these areas, it's not known for its greenness and its flowing. But we'll look at the foss as we kind of go along. But all this area was underwater, so consequently, it's not that this section of walls is missing. Sorry, we're going to pick up here we are. I'll just show this image here. So we just come down here. Sorry, we're on this side. And you can see that with it being the King's Fish Pool, it's flooded, you didn't need a section of the wall. So we haven't lost a section of the wall, simply it never existed here because the confluence of the Ouse and the Foss meant that it was a water defence rather than wall defence. But let's just pop round here. It'll take a minute, a little detour. Detourette. A tourette. That's good, isn't it? In fact, we could then, if we were a bit cute, instead of walking down something, we can walk down by. Yeah, we'll do that. Let's do that. We'll shortcut. See, we're going off-road now. So I think we'll go down by Roundtree Wharf, which is really rather nice. Much nice part of the walk, and we'll pick up Warngate Bar that way. Never would have thought to do that. How you inspire me. So yeah, completely underwater. So as I say, it was called the King's Fish Pool, and in fact, this new building over here, which is Civil Service, you know, I'll just see behind the tree there, is called King's Pool. For that very reason that it was flooded out and it belonged to the king. So the king was very, very keen on saying, "This is mine. You can't have any. These are all my fish. I need them all, every single one of them. I'm very hungry, and so consequently, I need them all. Can't spare any." Yeah, good. So this is St Anthony's Hall, old Bluecoat School. We've been down here before. We didn't go to the garden, didn't we? But I've just thought I'd bring you in here because it just gives you an illustration of how this idea of having a bit of wall in your garden and kind of landscaping around that was very desirable, kind of very fashionable, and also, let's be honest, very nice. Who wouldn't want your home to have a section of the medieval walls running through them? But if we're honest, if we did have that, would we really want the general public trudging through? I'm not sure. I think we'd want it all for ourselves. And so you can kind of understand why these wealthy individuals that had their bit of the walls were very keen to keep them as their bit of the walls and not have the horrible, great unwashed trudging through, dropping their litter and picking their noses and doing whatever the great unwashed were wont to do. But yeah, so here we are, somebody's garden, and a section of walls that you can cut out sections and have places to sit. And it's lovely, isn't it, Elizabeth? Yeah, it's St Anthony's Garden. St Anthony's Hall is behind us. But as I say, it shows really, I mean, obviously it's our public space, but this is how the walls were treated as private utility. We have logs stuck to them, because as we've got here, place to kind of dry out, but a place to kind of socialise, to sit, maybe just sew, to read, to paint. Who knows? But these, as I say, were private spaces that increasingly became sort of part of the kind of public realm. So it kind of changed this sort of sense of what the walls were. I think it's kind of nice to be able to show that to you. So well, let's get, they're quite deep as well. If you look down here, as the wall kind of runs away, we kind of get a nice kind of alcove. So pretty good storage. Yeah, exactly so. Let's be honest. We wouldn't want to be bloody public, traipsing through. Who'd want that? I certainly wouldn't. But I'm very antisocial. I've met the public. I don't like them. I like you lot, obviously, but you're not the public, are you? Because you're just lovely and you come on tours and you're nice. But to the public, yeah, I'm less keen. Natalie's off. Lovely to have you on. And we're 10 minutes, so I think we'll just about make it to Warmgate Bar in time. So I'm just going to have a little sip of my water. So St Anthony's Gardens, we'll come back again. We'll come back and Ghost of the Gardens are on, back in the autumn. A lovely spot. And these, oh, look at the squirrel there. You see that? How nice. Desperately wanted to go on YouTube, that squirrel. Remember on York Unlocked a few years ago, went in there in the thin ice press, the lovely lady from the university, told us all about the old printing presses. Everything. That was a really good tour. Really enjoyed that one. St Anthony's Hall, went in up here in York Unlocked as well. So many of these buildings now have been inside, and of course, hopefully we'll be doing that again in, I think, October the 3rd and the 4th. But haven't been in touch really to talk about what we're doing yet. But I hope to be involved in some way or other. So we'll leave behind St Anthony's Gardens. A lovely spot. So if you're in York, do come. Jane, if you haven't been, it's dead easy to find. If you're coming from York, past the Black Swan pub, beautiful sort of Tudor Elizabethan inn, which is just by us now. And I think we will, as I often say, is that as we're passing here, of course, this was the home of the landlords here with a thank you. What's on there? Diane, thank you, Diane. The landlord and landlady of this very inn were the parents of General Wolfe. He was conceived here, but then they up sticks and took a pub in Kent, which is where he was born in England. And so General Wolfe, of course, the famous Quebec, that's where the good stuff happened, and he came into being. So that's York's little link with Canada. We're getting cheered over there. The Hiscock building over here, and let's walk down here because I don't quite know. Let's go down Black Horse Passage because whilst it's pretty grotty, I do know the way from there. And if I go down here, I'm less convinced that I'm going to know the way because all this has been built up. This area is called Hungate, by the way, and it was an area of kind of notorious slums in the Victorian era. I mean, all the kind of really deep poverty in York. A lot of it was sort of surrounding this area. People kind of working in factories, associated trades on the Foss. But, kind of terrible, to public health, very high crime, sort of no education, and so forth. So it wasn't a kind of good place. So, as ever, kind of how interesting that they kind of make these places desirable off the back of slums. But that's, I guess, what regeneration is, isn't it? Is make it nice, and then the sort of people that would have been able to afford to live here at one time are totally priced out. But a bit big political there, I guess. But this was certainly a very working class district at one time, around Hungate, and I think you'd struggle to say that's the case today. But very nice. I'm not having a dig at the quality of the buildings, merely the pricing and the impact that has on people's affordability. So let's just cross over about here and so you'll underline the very point that I'm trying to draw your attention to, which is that you can pop in the sales and marketing suite and show apartment. Hungate, absolutely, H-U-N, Hungate, yeah. You only need a 5% deposit, which sounds great. But the last few apartments remain, and the prices start from £400,000. So by my dodgy maths, you're still going to need £20,000 in readies, plus all the fees to get started on that. So it's not a cheap place to live, which I say is somewhat ironic because this was the slum where those at the bottom of the bottom resided historically, and it ain't like that anymore. So York's carbuncle, the stone bow. Some people love it. I'm not one of them. From the 1960s, and there's even talk about preserving it. God knows why. It's horrible. You can put it down for me tomorrow. Not least because behind it you've got some fabulous buildings, St Saviour's Church, the Central Methodist Hall, and so forth. But people have weird ideas, don't they? There's some people that love that kind of. If you're one of them, I do apologise. I just don't share your love. But there's a sort of French brutalist architect called Corbusier that made everything ultra functional. But what I don't think is very livable. I mean, the thing with most of these things has been pulled down over the years is rare bit of kind of graffiti area in York. Gentrification, exactly, yeah, Polly, gentrification. Happens everywhere, right? Is these kind of upward, kind of vertical cities, vertical structures, didn't really create good living environments for people, weren't healthy. Lack of outdoor play space for children, lack of centre points where communities could interact. The old yard model, which this passage here, obviously this would have been Victorian yards, even though housing was cramped, within the yards you had a communal space, women out there doing the laundry, watching over the children, passing the day, chatting, working, but which I think it was sociable, it was communal. So when they kind of swept away working class housing, it tended to be replaced by these kind of tall buildings that then isolated people. Once you're up on your floor, that's where you were just a little narrow sort of passageway to access your apartment. I think it's kind of taking away. Yeah, I agree, Fran. It's hard to love, but as I say, it has its defenders, without a doubt, that believe that because there's so little in York that's like that, it's worthy of preservation. I'm not convinced by that line, but people are entitled to their point of view. You'd have to agree with me. But no, I'm not taking with that. I don't think that the whole kind of tower block experiment, whatever you want to call it, was successful. I think it was, retrograde. I think it's been largely abandoned. And we now know that, kind of communal space, green space, play space, place for people to interact, safe space, not creating lots of alleyways and hidden areas whereby, people can get up to crime and so forth, or get away from having committed crime. Bad idea. So I said I'd show you a bit of the foss in all its dinge, and the duckweed is kind of very much in evidence today, and the point just doesn't really flow. So Hungate was a car park. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Julian. There still is a car park here, but as you're right, it was an open car park. They call it the Shambles car park. So bloody buddleias everywhere. And I must say this is an area that's kind of frequented by street drinkers, which is okay. I suppose they have to go somewhere. But as you can see, there's just no obvious surface movement on this water, and consequently, it just doesn't sort of flow. And so when rubbish and detritus goes in there, as you'll see, it just sits. So it's always been, ever since I was a kid, the foss has always been the ugly duckling, if you like, the sort of forgotten, unloved child of York's rivers, which is a shame, not least because just here at the cut with the fabulous, former Rowntree's factory, the processing factory. You see the lift up at the top there for bringing the coffee beans. The press used to be down here as well. Have their rolls of paper brought down by water. So it was a working river for centuries, the foss. But unfortunately, it's been moved and messed around with too many times. It just doesn't really kind of move. But I love this building. I mean, this is obviously converted now into accommodation, quite a lot of holiday apartments and so forth in this area, not unsurprisingly, because it's very close to the city centre. But I think this is a very fine bit of industrial building. I'm not huge on industrial architecture, although I'm very picky. So I think sort of Titus Salt and Saltaire is the epitome of it. So I'd apply pretty high standards in judging what for me works aesthetically. But I would say this is pretty good. It's pretty good. Not the water. No, it isn't. It's not really associated with York either. We think of it as kind of being clean and free-flowing, but sadly not the foss. And of course, as we've spoken about in Saltaire, lots of windows, because windows letting light, and light prevented accidents, because accidents were bad for business. Everything had to stop and slow down. So it wasn't just about welfare, it was about profit, it was in your interest. So we've got a bit more free flowing just down here, which is good. It needs to kind of flow a little bit, but overall the foss is a mess. But as I say, all this area on this side, this is the Hung Gate from the other side now, where we're walking, this is again the rear of those developments. All this at one time was completely underwater. So as I say, there hasn't been a section of the walls taken out here. Merely this was a defensive structure that was based on flooding the area. So consequently, obviously you'd have walls and defences on the other side of that water. You couldn't just sort of sail in and rock up into York. But the concentric ring of walls has this big space on this eastern side of the city that was never ever part of the walls. So that's the reason why. So I thought I'd bring you down here. Bit of a change. Not been down here for a long time. I like them standing. I think I'll just pan around and give you another look, because there's definitely some gravitas to them. Well built. I mean, still here, of course. But as I say, this was the cocoa press factory, and the cocoa press, of course, was instrumental in making chocolate affordable. So if you're a chocolate fan, it's only comparatively recently that regular people would eat chocolate, because it was so expensive. If you think about the components of making chocolate, cocoa beans from Africa, sugar from the Caribbean, by the time it all could have come here, and very perishable, of course, as well, it meant it was a luxury good. It was very, very expensive. And so consequently, it was only really when Rowntree's, the chocolate manufacturer in York, invented the cocoa press, that basically then the last of it could come out, if you know what I mean, like, so the husks, rather than just sort of being sort of manually scraped out, they could be pressed, and suddenly you get these cocoa solids coming out that could then be used to make what they call milk chocolate. Obviously mixed with dairy, and they can reset and so forth. And chocolate starts to become something that is affordable, achievable for regular people, not on a frequent basis, obviously, but nonetheless, this building here, spin you around, one last look. This is where it all starts. So there you go, chocolate, one of life's necessities, really starts here, Susan. So unless you'd been kind of uber wealthy, if it hadn't been for the round, somebody else would have come up with it, I'm sure, but it so happens that the Rowntrees were the first to come up with this idea of the kind of cocoa press. And as I say, once you mix cocoa solids with butter and dairy and so forth, then you start to get the chocolate that we know, milk chocolate as it's called. And obviously we've gone the other way now, haven't we? People eat very dark, rich chocolates and very high cocoa solids and so, without all that stuff. But again, it's an artisan product. That's not your cheap, chocolate you give to a little kid, is it? So, consequently, that's where that all started. So, just bring it out. Let's sip water. We're almost we'll get down a little bit every time, but we're almost at the bar. So, chocolate. We've got chocolate fans on. Carolyn is a fan as well. Elizabeth. So we've got a few of the Chocky Brigade that are definitely pleased of the actions. And it's quite a nice thing as well, isn't it? That it sort of democratises really chocolate from it being, a tidbit for the super wealthy, to it being something that could be given. And the first real kind of popular use of chocolate, by the way, was in the Boer War. There's a Christmas thing, the Christmas tin that Queen Victoria, who was on the throne right at the end of her reign, knew that morale in South Africa in the trenches wasn't very good, and she decided to sort of cheer them up and sent them a tin. And the tin, of course, had patriotic pictures and the crest of Britain and all lions, all this, that, and the other. But inside was a couple of ounces of tobacco and chocolate coins. That's when it came chocolate coins. And Rowntrees and Terry's kind of came together to produce these. They've still got them in the Chocolate Museum in York Chocolate Story. They've got one in there. But that's the being an association of chocolate with Christmas, which is kind of quite nice, isn't it? And chocolate coins. So the idea of chocolate as a treat is Queen Victoria's idea. Cheer up the soldiers, having a rotten old time in South Africa. This is St Margaret's, a medieval church here, now the national centre of early music, kind of world-renowned now. because the acoustics in there. So they play early music is like, you know, music sort of before Mozart and Beethoven and stuff. So music from the sort of the 15th, 16th, 17th century, lutes and all that sort of stuff. So there's the walls back over there. We're not going to go on the walls this bit. We're going to walk to Warmgate Bar to be quicker. Going this way, so I appreciate Navigation Road is not the pretty. So all this is getting pulled down, or some of it's getting pulled down. I'm not quite sure what. These are definitely kind of some of the best located council flats in York. You can get one of these, very, very central. Warmgate, by the way, has always had a was an itinerant sort of population, and became when the Irish arrived. When the Irish arrived en masse in the 1840s, of course, following the hunger, the problems with the potato famine out in Ireland, many came and settled here. There's a history of the Irish coming to York as itinerant sort of summer labourers for the harvests, but from the 1840s onwards, they start settling. So we see this huge difference between the 1841 census, where there's a couple of hundred people from Ireland over here, and the 1851 census, where there's suddenly about 4,000. And they all settled in this area around here. So again, these are kind of modern replacements, although they're coming to the end of their lifespan now, these flats. But this again was a slum area. So the eastern side of York, Hungate, Warmgate, Bedden around there, you know, was very much the lower class. And as that is often the case, you know, when you've got immigrants, people will move into the lowest areas. This was also an area that was notorious for violence and for pubs. I think there was 13 pubs along the line with Warmgate. There's only 3, I think, left now. But it's still got a reputation for street drinking and sort of slightly kind of problematic. I mean, it's not bad by some city standards, but from York's point of view, by the river down there, in the strip round here, has still got this kind of name and reputation for being an area that's associated with drinking culture. Let's listen to early music. Thank you, Julie. Yes, absolutely right. So, Warmgate Bar, kind of coming to the last of our bars. That'll end this tour. But it's kind of nice to end here because it's the one that allows us to see up close what it was like to have that hot gravel drop down your neck. So again, largely rebuilt in the 16th century. It's a 13th century structure, and a former police house, now a cafe. We've got the original city doors on this side, so it's nice to be at ground level to sort of see this stuff. Obviously up on the walls you see some stuff. From down here you see other stuff. So as you're on a watch at the end of the night, there's the great oak doors of the city that can be closed. Cynthia, it's great, a little access door, look, so you can get in and out. It's pretty short. I mean, let me give you just spin that around. Here's me, and there's the top of that door. So not built for fellas of my height, but it's the other gate on this side. But this then is the Barbican. So this is the only one surviving, the one that survived the cull, that Sir Walter Scott and William Etty got there just in time before this one was pulled down, or this would have gone as well. But it gives us that complete sense now of what I was talking about, that in terms of a city's defences, if here is the main gate to the city, so we're seeing the gates just there, up here you can see the bottom spikes of the portcullis, you know, the spikes pointing down. So that's your iron and metal gateway that can come down, so that allows you in the daytime to have the gates open but the portcullis down, so you can see who's coming, you can raise it as and when. But if you're coming here with ulterior motives, if your plan was to try and invade the city, then of course you'd firstly have to deal with this structure. So we've got the gate there, you can see, we've got the outer Barbican, we've got the walkway, Crest of York up there, you might just about to see, I want to get run over, so I'll get out of the way. But you can see now from these walkways all the way around here that we've got a pretty substantial form of defence. So there we go. Warmgate Bar, 3 bars. Now I'm going to walk on this way. I'm probably going to just keep chatting for a minute. If people don't want to disappear, you're very welcome to stay, because I'm walking back way towards my car. So if you want to stay with me. Otherwise, this is the end of the official tour here at Warmgate Bar. But if you want to hang on and stay with me for a few more minutes until we get around to... so today we started off with Multangular Tower in the gardens. We've walked to Bootham Bar, and then we got up on the walls, did the walls around to Monk Bar. We had a look at Monk Bar, we got down, we walked around on the walls to Dewberry. We then did a cut through into York, yep, and we picked up at Warmgate Bar, and now I'm going to walk us round, for those that want to stay, to Fishgate. So you can see that's the two areas of flooding. There's the castle area, so consequently you have the castle walls in the way, and this is that area I was talking about here before. So this was the waterway that provided the defence on that kind of side of the city. So we've seen a goodly chunk. And David, you're very welcome. I say I'm just going to keep walking, just so I'm going that way anyway. I've got a few minutes of battery left on the phone. I might as well just keep going. So onwards and upwards, back up. Somebody fell off by the other day. I'm not quite sure where they fell. I think it was somewhere near the Minster, not on the section we went on. And I'm in two minds about it. I really hope that it doesn't kind of get an overreaction that they go, oh God, we could get sued, and so let's put, you know, warnings and ratings over it. It was really interesting. I was in years ago. This is when I worked for the council. I went on a twinning visit to Munster, and there's some other, I think, is it 50 years maybe? I think it's 50 years, but I could be wrong. I apologize if I got it wrong. Apologies, Munster. But that anniversary is coming up next year. So anyway, as the head of culture in York, I was sent on this mission. And anyway, one day we were there, we went to see this like festival, like a carnival, when you call it, I guess, in Germany. Like we used to have at kids, where there'd be like, you know, floats on the back of wagons, like people playing music and dressed up and this, that, and the other. Going real slow, but going through this town and this village. And they were all throwing these sweets out. And these kind of kids were sort of diving almost under the wheels as far as I was concerned, to get these little boiled sweets, you know, like sweets in a wrapper. I'm thinking, God, it's not worth risking your life. And I said to the lady who was like from my equivalent in Munster, this is crazy, there's no barriers, there's nothing. And she was saying, yeah, I find the opposite strange when I come to York. Yeah, she's been to York on a number of occasions because it's a twinning link. She says, you know, I'll see Mind the Step, and it's a kind of a step that's sort of 3 inches in height. That in Germany, they've got a completely different attitude towards health and safety. It's kind of on you to pay attention, it's not for other people to kind of mollycoddle you and kind of look over you. And there's part of that I mean, I'm attracted to when it comes to the walls, really, where it's pretty wide. For the most part, the fall, I mean, it's not great, you wouldn't choose to fall, but it's not kill you. But I think it would be a great shame if either we start plastering it with, you know, watch out signs all over the way. Happy birthday to you, by the way, in advance, I guess. But also put railings where they haven't been historically, because, of course, in the medieval era, you wouldn't have had railings. So that's an addition. I think, obviously, where it goes over roads or somewhere, you know, very high up, of course, I completely get that. But what it does do is it obviously makes it very narrow and constrains it. And it damages. You can't put in metal railings into old stone without damaging the stone. So, you know, there's a price to pay. And I mean, you tell me, what do you think? Do you think that if you're walking down here, would you expect railings? I'm interested to kind of know. Yeah, personal responsibility. I think that's Elizabeth giving a thumbs up to it. I think, you know, there's something to be said, isn't there? Do you know what I mean? Of, you know, taking care of yourself, and of course with people with disabilities or your kids, you know, you'd want to be watching out for that. But for the most part, I think for most people, they shouldn't really need to be told, you know, like, don't walk over there because you're going to fall. But you know, maybe I am. It's very difficult. You know, I kind of grew up with you know, in a generation of people that were pretty kind of tough and resilient, and they would have, you know, poo-pooed the suggestion that you need a warning. If you need to be told that falling off there is not a good idea, then you're probably not safe to be out by yourself anyway. But I'd say somebody fell off, but it's very unusual. I can't remember the last time somebody fell off the walls. So maybe it was a campaigner that was determined to kind of make a point that kind of wants to put walls in, so decided to sort of take one for their own campaign, as you might say, to up the ante, because I can't remember the last time anybody fell off. But it's one of the questions people ask, do you feel unsafe? Well, no, not at all, because this pavement is about 2 metres wide. You know, you have to be complete. You know, when you get a lot of people coming, but then you flat up over here. You know, this is the thing. I don't really get it. Other people can push you. You know, yes, I suppose so, Pat. Yeah. Just all I can say is it hasn't been my experience in York that it's a problem. I'm not saying it couldn't be, it wouldn't be. I suppose it could be. I hadn't really thought about it, but it's never been my experience. It tends to be a pretty chilled place to be, the walls. You know, because obviously you're almost taking time out, aren't you, from the bit windy. Yeah, Jay. We're a bit windy that day, were you? It's, yeah, like I say, personal responsibility is my kind of thing. So this is Fishergate Bar, one of the smaller gateways, not one of the main four ones. Closed up in the Tudor period because of did a bit of a riot down here with tax, of all things. So in order to show them in grates, they blocked it all up and didn't bother to reopen it until the 19th century. But let's go on this last section of wall up here. Oh, it's Poston Tower. If you remember, we went to Poston Tower in York Unlocked, went all the way to the top of the tower. Remember that? Very nice gentleman, I can't remember his name. White-haired gentleman, who told us all about the tower. Could barely get away that day. He was lovely, but he just kept talking. And I was sort of looking at my watch thinking, I've got a whole bunch of other places I need to be. But you sort of feel awful when somebody's in full flow. And you're like, I need to go. So in the end, oh, thank you so much for taking more of your time. But no, he was lovely. And of course, the Friends of York Walls do play a great role in York in maintaining these and volunteering and locking and unlocking and all sorts of things. That, of course, in these constrained times when the council is short of dosh, they're perennially short of dosh, fundraising and so forth, it is absolutely vital in keeping this utility open because, you know, having started in the Roman era, having kind of survived and not been destroyed by the Vikings, but built upon by the Vikings, having been utilised by King William the Conqueror 1,000 years ago, you know, having been then sort of rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt in the medieval period to create this fantastic sort of citadel. And then for the Victorians to come so close to pulling them down, but then realise the error of their ways and instead take them apart and rebuild them and gentrify them, that you know, it's tremendously important now that you know, we do utilise them and enjoy the fact this is the most complete set of walls. We've done 2/3 of them today. Anywhere in Britain, one of those complete sets in Europe. We're tremendously fortunate to have this resource. Of course, with it becomes responsibility, maintaining it, finding the budgets to do so forth, and the council go very pale looking when they think about the ongoing maintenance costs of having these walls. But imagine not having them. Imagine a city of York without walls. Where would we be? Well, we wouldn't be on this tour, that's for sure. But it's a tour that I do hope that you have understood. And David's not a big fan of spiral staircases. I must admit, David, one of my abiding memories as a child was going up the central tower of the Minster. And in those days, there was merely a rope that you could hang onto on one side, but not the other. And you had people going two different directions, and I felt like people bundling past me. I was going to fall to my death at the bottom of the Minster steps. Didn't happen, but I must admit I've never been up those steps ever since. It's probably about 50 years ago, and it still gives me. So there we go, all the way around. So we started Multangular Tower, Bootham Bar. We did this section, Monk Bar. We stopped at Dewberry. We walked through this section. We've done at Warmgate Bar. We're now come all the way on to Fishergate Poston Tower. So if that is not enough value for your coin, I can't offer you any more. But I do thank you for those that make contributions on the visible, and of course those that choose to use Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal. It's so you know, it's so helpful, and it keeps, you know, the equipment hire, the data monthly, all that sort of stuff. You know, in order to be able to do this at any kind of quality, it takes investment. So you guys are enabling it by giving me some of the money towards that. You keep it possible, because otherwise it gets to a stage you go, I can't do it because I can't justify spending money and not earning it back. So it's not asking for cash, it's just recognising, being honest with each other and going, this stuff costs cash. The phone hire, the data package, the equipment, the microphones. So, you know, that's what you're providing me money for. Not to feed me, I can do that myself, but to cover the costs of offering these weekly tours. So thank you so much for doing that. And for those that are not able to do so right now, don't worry, I know that when you can, you will. The links are around, and of course it'll be up on YouTube, so if you want to watch it again, you're most welcome to do so. So, not sure what we're going to watch tomorrow night, but I'll get that up probably this evening or tomorrow morning. We'll have a second sitting, and we'll look forward to seeing you. And I'll be in the chat to some forgotten treasure from the past. Last week we said Ghost of the Gardens. Not sure what it's going to be, but I'll be there, and I hope you will too. So, if you don't already subscribe, do on my YouTube channel, and hit the notification buttons and all that pizzazz. From that, I will say adieu and see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.